Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos. It is Friday, March 7th, and it is also Zion Adar. It is the 7th of Adar, the 7th of the month of Adar, and we're remembering that Misha Nichnas Adar Marbiim Simcha. When we enter into the month of Adar, we increase our joy as we approach the holiday of Purim. Um, so the weather has definitely made that easier than it might be, to make things a little happier around here. Right now, the Willamette River is flowing at 26,300 cubic feet per second, which is just over the median. The median is 25,000. Um, the 75th percentile is 37,000, so it's significantly below that, but it is above the median. The mean is 30,900 cubic feet per second, so it's basically right around in the middle, right around average right now. The high was in 1916 at 94,100 cubic feet per second, and the low was in 2005 at 7,220 cubic feet per second. In the sky right now, you'll see the moon, which it's 7 days old now, since it's the 7th of Adar. And so it's about 62% of a full moon. Mercury is up, it sets very early. Venus, Mars, and Jupiter are up right now. Um, Wanted to mention too that Orion is prominent in the sky right now, the constellation Orion, and in Hebrew or whatever language this is, the word for Orion is Kusil, and it's a name. It's a common name. And in fact, my father-in-law's Hebrew name is Yisrael Kusil. So Yisrael, and then the name of the constellation Orion. I heard flickers this morning. They seem to start singing a lot more in the early spring, so signs of spring are coming. I'm sure you guys have seen the daffodils coming up, um, and many other flowering shrubs, so that's really good news. This week's parasha is called Parashat Tetzaveh. Um, it is from the book of Exodus, and it continues in one section to describe one piece of the sacred furniture of the of the of the sanctuary of the Mishkan and later the temple. And this particular piece of furniture is the table for the incense. It appears it was an altar that was made that you kept coals on for the use of for using fire pans that you would then put incense on and and create huge dense clouds of smoke of incense smoke in the sanctuary. This is a picture of a priest um, purifying the incense altar. You can see that it's a relatively small structure, and on it there would be coals. Here's a picture um, of a procedure where they're carrying the fire pan. They would scoop coals off of an altar, and then put incense on it and carry it then to places that they were going to carry the incense, including into the Holy of Holies. Um, so what I wanted to talk about this morning, though, is the role of incense and the role of smell in in our rituals. So it's an ancient practice to include smells in ritual. So using incense is an old practice. It's all over the world. You see practices of smell all over the world. Here in the Americas, we have burning of sweetgrass, of juniper, sage, things like that. We have in the Catholic Church, and you see them carrying the incense, which is of course based in Judaism. Um, And in fact, you may not see this, you may not immediately think of it in terms of Jewish practice, but we do use smell as an important part of our practice. So, for example, on Sukkot, the four species, the etrog, the lulav, the hadassah, and the arava, all four species have smells. Even though people say that willow does not have smell, it has a smell. I don't know why they say that willow doesn't have a smell. It has a smell, but myrtle certainly has a beautiful smell. And etrog has, as we all know, a very strong, beautiful smell. The palm branch, the lulav, will smell during certain times of year, and when you actually dry it out and burn it, it has an incredible scent, incredible scent. And the willow has a smell as well, sort of a bitter a bitter smell that for me immediately evokes rivers. So um, so we use that on Havdalah at the end of Shabbat, for example. We use spices, most notably cinnamon, to sort of express something, to ceremonialize the feeling and the experience and the sensuality and the spirituality of Shabbat. So we're sort of wiring ourselves to sort of associate Shabbat with with the sense of smell. In fact, Jewish cultures and communities used incense and smells up until the present. Some communities still do this. In Ashkenazi cultures, apparently there was a particular point in which people stopped using incense in services. But when I was in Israel, for example, in the northern part in Tzfat, I went to one of the Hasidic shuls there, and at the end of the service, there was a bunch of myrtle, and you could pick up the myrtle and rub it between your hands and smell it. And so you would smell that as you were walking out of the synagogue. Practice that I touches me is that on Yom Kippur, when we don't eat, don't drink, um, there's a question about because we're not eating and drinking, how would we possibly fulfill this obligation or this custom to say 100 brachot, 100 blessings per day. If we're not blessing our food, we end up short on our 100 blessings per day. And so there's a suggestion that you smell spices throughout the day. So you smell it, you make a blessing over the smell of the spices, then you put it away. And then a while later, you go back and you make a blessing again over the spices in order to make up 100 blessings that people try to do every day. So though these days we might notice that there's no real emphasis on smell. Very rarely is there a thing of, an emphasis on smell in our services, in our Jewish services. We do, for example, associate various things about Judaism and home. So, for example, people have a nostalgic association for the smell of latkes, the smell of challah baking. Um, Gosh, what else? The smell of certain Jewish foods, right? The smell of a clean house on Pesach, all of these things. But for example, other Jewish communities actually have practices of lighting certain kinds of incense. So I heard a story from one man for whom the smell of frankincense is like connected to Shabbat for him because his family would burn incense on Friday as part of their practice. Um, of bringing in Shabbat. So smell is very important. So I wanted today to make a connection between smell, the concept of purity, and the concept of awe and the emotion of awe. So smell is a fascinating sense. And in some ways, it is the most primordial sense, is the most primal sense. So the American Psychological Association, a paper for the American Psychological Association, writes, smell is an ancient sense. All living things, from single-celled bacteria to the most accomplished bloodhound, can detect chemicals in their environment. Odors are molecules, after all, and olfaction is just the vertebrate version of chemical sensing. However, Despite its ubiquity and its deep roots, the importance of olfaction is easy to ignore. According to psychologist Johan Lundström, PhD, a faculty member at the Monell Chemical Senses Center in Philadelphia, there are two big reasons why olfaction can be um, the importance of it can be ignored. And the first is the lack of words. We can create rich descriptions for objects by expressing their colors, shapes, sizes, and textures. Sounds come complete with volume, pitch, and tone. Yet it's almost impossible to describe a scent without comparing it to another familiar aroma. We don't have a good language for odors, says Johann Lundström. Second, he says we can blame the brain. For all the other senses, sensory memos are delivered straight to the thalamus, the big switchboard of the brain, as he says, and from there out to the primary sensory cortices, sorry. But olfactory input winds its way through other brain regions, including centers for memory and emotion, before reaching the thalamus. In neuroscience, we say a little bit nonchalantly that nothing reaches consciousness unless it has passed the thalamus, he writes. For olfaction, you have all this basic processing before you have conscious awareness of the odor. So, in other words, the sense of smell is a primal sense. It may be our oldest sense, evolutionarily speaking, and we have trouble conjuring up words to help us describe what something smells like. So I sometimes think when we're describing something that is spiritual, we're describing something that is difficult to capture in words. So smell in Judaism is often said to be the most spiritual of the senses, the most spiritual of the senses. And I think part of it is because the effect is so primal. When you smell, you have all these nonverbal, pre-verbal kinds of experiences when you smell. You remember things, but you're not necessarily clear on what it is you're remembering necessarily. Sometimes you're like, oh, it smells like my nana's house. Sometimes you smell something and you're just like, I don't know what that reminds me of. It makes me feel X, Y, or Z. But there's sort of no words. You can just sort of say what it feels like or what it reminds you of. So I think sometimes that's what we mean by spiritual is things that are hard to put into words. It's notable, by the way, that the spiritual generally is connected to breath, and of course, smell is very much related to breath. So the other aspect is that smell is connected to a sense of awe. So in the Harvard Gazette, there's an article that says smells are handled by the olfactory bulb. Sorry, smells are handled by the olfactory bulb, the structure in the front of the brain that sends information to the other areas of the body's central command for further processing. Odors, however, take a direct route to the limbic system, including the amygdala and hippocampus, the regions related to emotion and memory. The olfactory signals very quickly get to the limbic system. Okay. Um, so in other words, it goes straight into the way we perceive without having to be analyzed in the same way. So it does this pre-verbal thing. Dr. Keltner, who's a researcher at UC Berkeley who studies the emotion of awe, which is fascinating. He just wrote a book a few years ago on the emotion of awe. He actually mentions specifically the fascinating thing about neurophysiology. He says, for example, sound waves coming off streams and moving bodies of water activate the vagus nerve. They calm us down. There are chemical compounds in nature. You might smell a flower or a tree bark or the resin on a tree, and that smell activates parts of the brain and the immune system. So our bodies are wired to respond in an open, empowering, strengthening way to nature. And he speaks about how the sense of smell often evokes what we would now call awe. We would now express as a feeling of awe. Interestingly, Dr. Keltner notices that one of the experiences that people describe when they have an experience of awe is a sense of feeling purified, a sense of feeling purified. And in the literature about incense and the um, the incense that's used in the Mishkan and the temple, it is a critical aspect of creating a pure environment, an environment of purification. In fact, we actually recite during plagues, for example, or when sicknesses come raging through towns. We did this during COVID. Many of us actually tried to meditate on the incense mixture every day because thinking of and smelling the incense, meditating on the incense is thought to bring a kind of purity that protects people from illness. Noticing how Keltner and other people who were talking about the sense of smell also say the smell is very closely related to memory. So when you can use smell, when you can use smell in combination with ceremony, for example, you end up building a direct relationship between certain smells and the feeling and the experience of various ceremonies. So recall, for example, that one person who I mentioned, who I heard from, who said for his family, the smell of Shabbat was like it was frankincense for him. When he smells frankincense, he goes right into Shabbat mode. When some of us smell cinnamon, we might immediately go to Havdalah. But smell is very closely connected to memory, and when you are, creating a ceremony that has emotional import and psychological import, and you want to build up a muscle memory of that, attaching it to smell is a very wise thing to do. So keeping that in mind, the Sefer HaChinuch, who's writing in medieval Iberian Peninsula, says that it is from the roots of this commandment to burn incense, to aggrandize, to lift up, to make the glory of the Mishkan apparent, and to have its loftiness and awe be upon the face of every person. In other words, it's a visible, experienced sense of awe. And he says awe, by the way, and it is only possible to aggrandize something in the heart of people and their thoughts with things that one associates with greatness, and in which you will find delight and joy. And it is well known that a good smell is a thing that the spirit of a person enjoys and desires, and that draws the heart very much. And the smell of the incense was the best that can possibly be made by human beings, to the point that they, may their memory be blessed, said in the chapter Amar Lachem Hamenuche, Hamemuneh, Mishnah Tamid 3:8, blah, 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 that the people would smell the incense from all the way from Jericho. If the incense was burning in Jerusalem, they would smell it in Jericho. So good Shabbos, everyone. I want to encourage us to use the sense of smell more ritually, and maybe even find ways of in using it more at synagogue, and to enjoy the sense of smell, and to acknowledge when you enjoy this sense of smell, and note to yourself when powerful things happen through the sense of smell that you are experiencing awe, and become more aware of that effect on you. Okay, good Shabbos, everyone.